They thought humans were just another primitive species crawling out of their gravity well, barely worth the effort of cataloging. The Galactic Council's xenobiologists had seen it all before. Bipedal mammals with opposable thumbs, basic tool use, and delusions of grandeur. When humanity's first ambassador arrived at the Nexus station, the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds barely looked up from their data tablets. But Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't there to beg for scraps at their table. She carried something in her open palm that would shatter every assumption they'd made about the minor species from Sol. 3. Something that would reveal the greatest secret the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had been desperately hiding for millennia. What they discovered that day would change the balance of power forever and make them realize that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that doesn't look like a threat at all. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the polished crystalline floor of Nexus Station, the galaxy's diplomatic heart. The massive space station rotated slowly in the void between 7 star systems, its bioluminescent corridors pulsing with a soft blue light that was supposed to be calming to most species. To Elena, it looked like the inside of a jellyfish. The reception committee was exactly what she'd expected, a collection of beings who looked at her the way museum curators might examine a particularly unremarkable fossil. The Zephyrian delegate, tall and stick-thin with silver skin that rippled like liquid mercury, barely acknowledged her presence with a dismissive wave of his elongated fingers. The Corvan ambassador, a crystalline entity that hummed at frequencies just below human hearing, seemed more interested in the mathematical equations floating in the air around its geometric head than in greeting Earth's first representative. Dr. Vasquez, said the Altarian protocol officer, her voice carrying the typical condescending tone Elena had grown accustomed to during the 3-month journey from Earth. You'll be housed in the minor species quarters. The orientation session begins in 6 standard hours. Please try to keep up with the translation systems. We understand your species hasn't developed universal translators yet. Elena smiled politely and nodded, her fingers unconsciously closing around the small device in her coat pocket. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment, and she wasn't about to let their dismissive attitudes ruin it. She'd expected the condescension. What she hadn't expected was how wrong they were about everything. The minor species quarters turned out to be a cramped section of the station that smelled faintly of ozone and disappointment. Her room was barely large enough for the narrow bed and desk, with a porthole that looked out into the swirling nebula that surrounded the station. As she unpacked her few belongings, Elena could hear her neighbors through the thin walls. A delegation from Kepler, 442b, arguing in their clicking language about trade routes, and what sounded like a member of the aquatic Delphini species splashing around in their water-filled chamber. The orientation session was held in what the station called the Newcomers Amphitheater, though Elena suspected it had a less charitable name among the established species. About 40 delegates from various minor civilizations filled the curved seating area, while a holographic Altarian administrator floated at the center, its blue form shimmering as it spoke. "Welcome to the Galactic Council," the hologram intoned. "As representatives of species that have recently achieved basic spaceflight, you are granted observer status. You may attend public sessions, submit requests for consideration, and participate in cultural exchange programs. However, you do not have voting rights nor access to advanced technologies until your species demonstrates sufficient evolution."
The word hung in the air like an insult.
Elena glanced around at her fellow minor species representatives. Most looked defeated before they'd even begun. A few seemed angry, their alien features contorting in ways she couldn't quite read. But none of them seemed to understand what she was beginning to piece together. The administrator continued, "The Council operates under the guidance of the core species, the Zephyrians, Corvani, Altarians, Nexari, and Vorthan. These civilizations have demonstrated mastery over the fundamental forces that govern interstellar civilization. They serve as mentors and guides for younger species like yourselves." Elena raised her hand. "What kind of mastery, specifically?" The hologram's expression didn't change, but she could sense its annoyance. "Energy manipulation, quantum consciousness interfacing, dimensional folding, temporal mechanics, and what your species might call pionics. These are the hallmarks of truly advanced civilization." "And you've mastered all of these?" Elena asked, her tone carefully neutral. "The core species have spent millions of your years perfecting these arts. It's what separates the children from the adults in galactic society." The administrator's tone carried just enough disdain to make several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. After the session, Elena made her way to the observation deck, a vast transparent dome that offered a panoramic view of the stars. She wasn't surprised when she was approached by 3 other delegates. Word traveled fast among the minor species, and her questions during orientation had apparently marked her as someone worth talking to. Dr. Vasquez, isn't it? The speaker was Ambassador Krill from the Epsilon Eridani system, his insectoid features clicking as he spoke through his translator. Bold questions in there, though I wonder if wisdom might suggest keeping such curiosity to ourselves. Depends on what you're curious about, Elena replied, studying the stars. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about the core species' actual capabilities? Not what they tell us, but what you've observed. Krill's compound eyes glittered. An interesting question. Why do you ask? Elena was joined by the other 2 delegates, Commander Yates from a human colony that had developed independently on Proxima Centauri, and Dr. Meshka, a reptilian scientist from the vegan system. They formed a small circle near the vast windows, their voices low. Because something doesn't add up, Elena said. 5 species, supposedly millions of years old, with mastery over the fundamental forces of the universe. Yet here they are, running a bureaucracy. Don't you find that odd? Commander Yates frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we should look a little closer at our hosts. Elena pulled out her handheld scanner, a device that looked primitive compared to the flowing organic technology the core species used. This is a basic electromagnetic spectrum analyzer. Nothing fancy, but it's picked up some interesting readings since I arrived. She activated the device and pointed it discreetly toward the nearest Altarian technician. The readings that appeared on the small screen made Dr. Meshka hiss in surprise. That can't be right, the reptilian scientist whispered. The scanner showed energy patterns that were wrong. The Altarian supposedly advanced biotechnology was emitting signatures that looked suspiciously like very sophisticated conventional electronics. Not the quantum consciousness interfaces they claimed to use, but glorified computers running on principles that even Earth scientists understood. I've been taking readings for 3 days, Elena continued. The Corvin mathematical displays, holographic projections with pre-programmed equations, the Zephyrian liquid metal skin, smart materials that respond to electrical impulses, the Nexari dimensional folding technology. I haven't seen any evidence it actually exists. Krill's translator made a series of agitated clicking sounds before he managed to speak. You're suggesting they're faking it? I'm suggesting they're not as advanced as they want us to believe. The question is, why would they need to maintain such an elaborate deception? Commander Yates leaned closer. What kind of readings are you getting from their advanced technologies? Elena switched the scanner to a different mode. This is where it gets really interesting. Their power sources are incredibly inefficient for supposedly advanced technology. Their data transmission rates are actually slower than what we've achieved on Earth. And their manufacturing techniques... She paused, making sure no one was listening. They show signs of being built rather than grown, despite their claims of biotechnological mastery. Dr. Meshka's scaled features showed what Elena interpreted as concern. If this is true, then why haven't any of the other minor species discovered it? Maybe they have, Elena said quietly. Maybe that's why there are so few of them who ever advance beyond observer status. Maybe questioning the core species too closely isn't conducive to a long diplomatic career. The implications hung in the air between them. If the core species were maintaining their dominance through deception rather than genuine technological superiority, then the entire power structure of galactic civilization was built on a lie. More concerning was the question of what they were hiding and why they needed to hide it. Elena looked out at the stars, thinking about the device still hidden in her coat pocket. Tomorrow was the formal presentation ceremony, where each minor species would demonstrate some aspect of their culture or technology to the assembled council. Most of the other delegates planned to show art, music, or basic scientific achievements. Elena had something different in mind. There's going to be a presentation tomorrow, she said to her small group of allies. I think it's time someone showed the core species what humanity actually brought to the table. As they talked quietly about their discoveries, none of them noticed the small floating probe that had been recording their conversation from behind a structural beam. The probe's data was already being transmitted to a secure location deep within the station, where beings far older and more dangerous than the council representatives were beginning to take a very serious interest in Dr. Elena Vasquez and her primitive little scanner. The game was about to change, though none of them understood the true stakes yet. In her coat pocket, Elena's fingers touched the device that would soon reveal not just the core species deceptions, but something far more dangerous. Something that would explain why they were so desperate to keep the younger races from advancing too quickly. Something that would make them realize that humanity's arrival at the Nexus wasn't just another diplomatic contact. It was the beginning of the end, of the greatest lie ever told among the stars. Elena spent the night running detailed scans throughout the minor species quarters, her scanner hidden inside what appeared to be a standard datapad. What she discovered made her stomach turn. The energy signatures weren't just wrong. They were actively being masked by sophisticated jamming fields that operated just outside the normal sensory ranges of most galactic species. The jamming fields themselves told a story. They were designed to hide something specific, the true nature of the core species' technology. But they had a fatal flaw. They were optimized for the sensory ranges of known galactic species. Humanity's electromagnetic spectrum was slightly different from the galactic standard, shifted just enough that Elena's basic scanner could detect the edges of the deception. At 0300 station time, Elena made a decision that would have horrified her diplomatic training instructors back on Earth. She left her quarters and began exploring areas of the station that were officially off-limits to minor species representatives. The maintenance corridors were exactly where she expected them to be, following the basic engineering principles that governed all rotating habitats, regardless of which species built them. The fact that the station followed such predictable design patterns was itself suspicious for a structure supposedly built by beings who had mastered dimensional folding. Her scanner led her deeper into the station's infrastructure, following power conduits that grew larger and more heavily shielded as she progressed. The readings she was getting made no sense if the core species were truly as advanced as they claimed. The power requirements were enormous, far beyond what should be necessary for a station of this size if it was built with genuinely advanced technology. Elena found herself in a vast chamber deep in the station's core. The space was filled with massive crystalline structures that hummed with barely contained energy. But these weren't the organic flowing forms she'd seen in the public areas. These were clearly manufactured with sharp edges and geometric patterns that spoke of industrial production rather than biological growth. More disturbing were the alcoves built into the chamber walls, hundreds of them, each containing what looked like a stasis pod. And in each pod was a figure that Elena's scanner identified as belonging to one of the minor species that had visited the station over the past several decades. She checked her scanner readings twice, unable to believe what she was seeing. The pods weren't just stasis chambers, they were extraction units. Each one was slowly, methodically draining something from its occupant. The energy patterns were unlike anything in her database, but the process was clearly harmful to whoever was inside. A soft sound behind her made Elena freeze. She turned to see a Nixari technician floating into the chamber, its bioluminescent body pulsing with what she now recognized as completely artificial light patterns. "Dr. Vasquez," the being said in perfect, unaccented English, "you're very persistent. Most minor species representatives never make it this deep into the station's infrastructure." Elena's hand moved slowly toward the emergency beacon in her pocket, but the Nexari made a dismissive gesture. "That won't work down here. The shielding is quite comprehensive. Please, don't be afraid. We have much to discuss." "Who are you really?" Elena asked, her scanner still active and recording everything. "We are exactly who we say we are," the Nexari replied. "We are the core species. We do govern galactic civilization. We have maintained peace and stability for millennia. What we haven't been entirely honest about is how." The chamber's lighting shifted, revealing more details that Elena's human eyes could now perceive. The crystalline structures weren't just power sources. They were processing centers, and the energy they were processing had the same signature as the pods containing the minor species representatives. "You're harvesting them," Elena said, the pieces falling into place. "You're draining something from other species." "Not draining," the Nexari corrected. "Borrowing." Every species in the galaxy possesses unique neural patterns, creative potential, technological insights. When we encounter a new civilization, we study these patterns. We learn from them. We incorporate their best qualities into our own understanding. Elena's scanner was now showing readings that made her blood run cold. The energy being processed wasn't just neural patterns, it was consciousness itself. The core species were stealing the minds of other species and using them to enhance their own capabilities. That's why you never let minor species advance, she realized. Because once they get too sophisticated, they might figure out what you're doing. You've been feeding off younger civilizations for millions of years. The Nixari's expression didn't change, but its bioluminescent pattern shifted to something Elena interpreted as amusement. Dr. Vasquez, you're partially correct. But you're also thinking too small. We don't just feed off younger civilizations, we cultivate them. The chamber transformed around them, the walls becoming transparent to reveal the true scope of the Nexus station. It wasn't just a diplomatic facility, it was a vast breeding and processing complex. Thousands of levels stretched out in all directions, each one containing laboratories, observation chambers, and what could only be described as farms for sentient beings. Every species you've met today, every minor civilization in the Council, was guided to spaceflight by us. We seed promising worlds with technology, influence their development, and eventually bring them here when they reach the proper stage of advancement. The ones that show the most potential become permanent residents. Elena felt sick. How many species have you destroyed this way? Destroyed is such a harsh word. We prefer optimized. And the number is significant. Though I should point out that the process has brought stability and peace to the galaxy. Before our management, wars between species were common. Now, there is only cooperation under our guidance. Cooperation through slavery, Elena said. Cooperation through wisdom. We've learned from thousands of species, Dr. Vasquez. We've absorbed their knowledge, their creativity, their unique perspectives. We've become more than any single species could be alone. And in return, we've given the galaxy order. Elena's scanner detected movement throughout the chamber. More core species representatives were arriving, their supposedly advanced forms now clearly revealed as sophisticated biomechanical constructs. Each one was different, clearly built from the absorbed characteristics of multiple species. Which brings us to humanity, the Nixari continued.
Your species has shown remarkable promise.
Your technological development has been surprisingly rapid. Your creative potential is quite high, and your adaptability is exceptional. You would make an excellent addition to our collective. Over my dead body, Elena said, backing toward what she hoped was an exit. That won't be necessary. The process is quite painless, and your consciousness will continue to exist as part of something greater. In fact, many of the individuals you see here volunteered once they understood the true scope of what we've accomplished. Elena's scanner was now detecting massive movement throughout the station. Whatever was about to happen, the core species were preparing for it on a large scale. She had minutes, maybe less, before whatever escape routes existed was sealed off. There is one thing I'm curious about, the Nexari said, floating closer. Your scanner has been remarkably effective at penetrating our security measures. Most minor species technology is far too primitive to detect our masking fields. How did you manage it?
Elena smiled for the first time since entering the chamber.
Because you made an assumption about human technology. You assumed we were still using electromagnetic spectrum analysis based on our biological sensory ranges. And you're not? Dr. Vasquez, came a voice from Elena's hidden communicator. This is Commander Chen aboard the Earth ship Curiosity. We're reading your beacon signal and are prepared to begin extraction. The Nexari's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Elena was now certain was alarm. That's impossible. No minor species has the technology for faster-than-light communication. Elena pulled the device from her coat pocket, not the scanner she'd been using, but something far more sophisticated. The quantum entanglement communicator represented humanity's first truly revolutionary breakthrough, achieved just weeks before her departure for Nexus Station. You're right, Elena said. We don't have faster-than-light communication. This message was sent the moment I activated my beacon. But the response was sent 3 hours ago, when we detected the quantum signatures of your stasis chambers. The chamber's alarms began blaring as Elena's device revealed its true function. It wasn't just a communicator. It was a quantum resonance scanner that had been mapping the entire station's infrastructure since her arrival, and every piece of data it had collected was now being transmitted to a human fleet that had been waiting at the edge of the system. The thing about humans, Elena said as energy weapons began charging around her, is that we're really, really good at lying when we need to be. Did you honestly think we'd send our first ambassador without backup? The last thing she saw before the extraction beam took her was the Nexari's expression changing to something she finally understood clearly. Fear. For the first time in millennia, the core species had encountered a minor species that was more advanced than they appeared to be. And that species had just declared war on them without saying a single word. As the quantum extraction beam pulled her through space toward the waiting human fleet, Elena wondered if the core species understood yet what humanity had really brought to the galaxy. It wasn't just another primitive civilization ready to be harvested. It was something they'd never encountered before, a species that had been watching them just as carefully as they'd been watching everybody else. The real fight was about to begin. Elena materialized in the quantum extraction chamber aboard the Earth ship Curiosity, her legs giving out as the disorientation of instantaneous transportation hit her. Strong hands caught her arms. Commander Chen, exactly as she remembered him from the mission briefings, but his expression was grim in a way that suggested the past few hours had been eventful. "Welcome back, Dr. Vasquez," Chen said, helping her to a nearby chair. "We've got a lot to discuss and not much time to do it. Your quantum scans just confirmed our worst fears about the core species." Elena looked around the extraction chamber, noting details that hadn't been part of the original mission plan. The walls were lined with quantum processing units that were clearly military-grade, and the tactical displays showed a fleet configuration that was far larger than what she'd been told to expect. "How many ships do we have out there, Commander?" she asked. 47 combat vessels, 12 science ships, and about 300,000 very angry humans who just learned that galactic civilization is built on mass slavery and consciousness theft. Chen activated a holographic display that showed the space around Nexus Station. "We've been watching the station for 6 months, Elena. Your mission was just the final confirmation we needed." The hologram revealed a truly staggering sight. The human fleet wasn't just positioned around Nexus Station, it was surrounding a massive complex of interconnected structures that stretched for millions of kilometers in every direction. What Elena had thought was a single diplomatic station was actually the tip of an iceberg that comprised one of the largest artificial structures in known space. 6 months? Elena said. But the mission briefing said this was first contact. Chen's expression grew even more serious. That was the cover story. The truth is, we've been aware of galactic civilization for almost a decade. We've been watching, learning, and preparing. Your diplomatic mission was designed to get us close enough to confirm what we suspected about the core species. Elena studied the tactical displays, noting weapon signatures and ship configurations that represented technology she'd never seen in any Earth briefing. "Commander, these ships, they're not using any technology I recognize from Earth's military programs."
Because they're not from Earth's public military programs, Chen replied.
"Dr. Vasquez, there are some things about humanity's recent development that weren't included in your briefing. Things that become relevant when you discover that galactic civilization is run by parasitic consciousness thieves." A new voice joined the conversation as Admiral Sarah Wong entered the chamber, her uniform bearing insignia that Elena didn't recognize. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm Admiral Wong, commanding officer of the Terran Liberation Fleet. We need to debrief you immediately on everything you discovered in the core species facility." Elena looked between Chen and Wong, noting the tension in their body language. "Liberation Fleet? Admiral, what exactly has been going on while I was playing diplomat?" Wong activated a secure holographic projector that filled the chamber with data streams from Elena's quantum scanner. "Your device did more than just map the station, Doctor. It interfaced with the core species systems and downloaded approximately 4 petabytes of data about their operations throughout the galaxy. The data streams resolved into a 3-dimensional map that showed thousands of star systems connected by lines of various colors. Each line represented a different type of relationship, trade routes, communication networks, and something else that made Elena's blood run cold. "Those red lines," Elena said slowly. "Those are harvest routes." "Correct," Wong said, "and they show the true scope of the core species operations. They're not just harvesting consciousness from minor species at Nexus Station. They've been doing it systematically throughout the galaxy for approximately 3 million years." Elena studied the map more closely, noting patterns that revealed the horrifying efficiency of the operation. "They're farming entire civilizations, guiding their development, harvesting the most creative individuals, then managing the remaining populations to prevent them from advancing too quickly." "Gets worse," Chen said, highlighting a section of the map. "Those yellow lines represent species that have been completely consumed. Civilizations that no longer exist because the core species drained every useful mind they produced." The scope of the atrocity was staggering. Thousands of species, billions of intelligent beings, reduced to raw material for the core species enhancement programs. But something else was bothering Elena. "About the data. Admiral," she said, "this map shows Earth's location. But our entry point isn't marked as a standard contact protocol. Why not?" Wong and Chen exchanged a look that Elena interpreted as significant. "Because humanity wasn't contacted according to their standard protocols," Wong said. "We were supposed to be contacted and processed 200 years ago. Something went wrong with their timeline." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Wrong. How? The core species sent a reconnaissance probe to Earth in 1823, Chen explained. Standard procedure for identifying species ready for guidance towards spaceflight. The probe was supposed to make subtle contact, plant some technological seeds, and begin the cultivation process. What happened to it? We shot it down, Wong said simply. A British naval vessel in the North Atlantic detected something they described as a metallic sea serpent and opened fire with everything they had. Pure luck. The probe's stealth systems weren't designed to handle chemical explosives. Elena stared at the tactical display, trying to process the implications. So, humanity developed spaceflight independently, without their guidance. More than that, Chen said. Humanity developed spaceflight while actively researching the wreckage of their probe. We've been reverse engineering core species technology for 2 centuries. We just kept it very, very quiet. Admiral Wong activated another holographic display that showed technical specifications for the ships surrounding them. Elena's background in quantum engineering allowed her to understand enough to be amazed. The human fleet wasn't just advanced, it was using principles that seemed to surpass even the core species' claimed capabilities. This is impossible, Elena said, studying the quantum drive specifications. These ships should be able to travel faster than anything in known space. They can, Wong confirmed. Doctor. Vasquez, humanity has been preparing for this day for over a century. We knew that eventually we'd be contacted by whatever species sent that probe. We just never expected to discover that they were running a galactic horror show. Elena's communicator chimed with an incoming message from the station. The Nexari technician's voice was perfectly calm, but she could now detect the underlying mechanical quality that revealed its artificial nature. Doctor. Vasquez, we know you're monitoring this transmission. We're prepared to negotiate. Your species has demonstrated impressive technological capabilities, and we're willing to discuss a partnership arrangement rather than the standard processing protocols. Admiral Wong laughed, but there was no humor in it. Partnership. They want to negotiate with the species that just uncloaked a fleet they never saw coming and demonstrated technology they can't understand. How diplomatic of them. Elena looked at the tactical display, noting that more core species vessels were converging on Nexus Station. But their formations were defensive, not aggressive. They're scared, she realized. They should be, Chen said. Dr. Vasquez, your quantum scanner didn't just penetrate their security systems. It also interfaced with their central processing network. We now have complete tactical intelligence on their entire operation, including the locations of every processing facility, every harvested species, and every weakness in their infrastructure. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow.
You're going to attack them.
We're going to liberate them, Admiral Wong corrected. Every species they've enslaved, every consciousness they've stolen, every civilization they've suppressed. The core species' reign of terror ends today. Elena studied the tactical displays showing the approaching core species vessels. Their technology was sophisticated, but now that she knew what to look for, she could see the telltale signs of systems built from stolen knowledge rather than genuine innovation. They were dangerous because they'd had millions of years to accumulate power, but they weren't genuinely advanced. Admiral, she said, there's something else you need to know. The core species aren't a single entity. Each of them is a collective consciousness built from thousands of absorbed minds. When we attack them, we're potentially killing the stolen consciousness of every species they've ever harvested. The chamber fell silent as the true complexity of the situation became clear. They weren't just fighting to defeat an oppressive regime. They were fighting to liberate the victims who had become part of their oppressors. Wong's expression hardened with determination. Then we'd better make sure we do this right the first time. Dr. Vasquez, you've just become our most important strategic asset. You're the only human who's been inside their facilities and survived to tell about it. Elena looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's viewports, thinking about the thousands of species represented in those stasis pods, the civilizations that had been consumed, and the ones that were still being slowly drained of everything that made them unique. What do you need from me? She asked. Everything you learned about their infrastructure, their security systems, and their weaknesses, Wong replied. Because in approximately 6 hours, the Terran Liberation Fleet is going to do something that hasn't been attempted in 3 million years. What's that? We're going to give the galaxy its freedom back. Elena nodded, understanding that everything she'd believed about humanity's place in the universe had just changed forever. They weren't a minor species begging for recognition from their betters. They were the galaxy's only hope for liberation from a horror that had been masquerading as civilization for longer than human civilization had existed. The war for galactic freedom was about to begin, and humanity was going to lead it. The liberation of Nexus Station began not with weapons fire, but with something far more devastating to the core species: the truth, broadcast simultaneously to every communication network in the galaxy. Elena stood in the Curiosity's command center, watching as Admiral Wong coordinated the most complex military operation in human history. The tactical displays showed human ships moving into position around not just Nexus Station, but dozens of other core species facilities that Elena's quantum scanner had revealed. Each target was a processing center where stolen consciousness was being harvested and integrated into the collective minds that called themselves the galaxy's rulers. Dr. Vasquez, came a voice from the communication station. We're receiving surrender offers from 17 minor species delegations. They're asking for extraction from the station. Elena nodded, understanding their fear. Once the shooting started, anyone still aboard Nexus Station would be caught in the crossfire. But the situation was more complex than simple evacuation. Admiral, Elena said, some of those delegations may already be compromised. The core species showed me processing chambers that were designed to look like standard diplomatic quarters. We need to scan everyone we extract to make sure they're still themselves. Wong's expression darkened. How can we tell? The quantum signatures I detected showed that partial consciousness absorption creates specific neural pattern disruptions. Anyone who's been in those chambers for more than a few days will show anomalous brainwave patterns. Elena pulled up the data from her scanner. I can configure our medical scanners to detect the changes. The first wave of human ships reached their targets exactly on schedule. Elena watched the tactical displays as vessels she now knew represented centuries of secret technological development engaged core species defenses that had protected their operations for millennia. The results were devastating. For the core species, their defensive systems, built from the accumulated knowledge of thousands of absorbed civilizations, were sophisticated but predictable. They represented the best technology available to species that had been guided and controlled throughout their development. What they couldn't account for was a species that had developed independently, following technological paths that the core species had never encountered. Direct hit on Nexus Station's primary processing center, reported Commander Chen from his position at the tactical station. Their quantum containment systems are failing. We're reading massive energy releases from the consciousness storage matrices. Elena felt a chill. Admiral, those energy releases represent the stored minds of potentially millions of beings. If the storage matrices collapse completely, we lose everyone they've ever taken, Wong finished. Chen, how long do we have? Approximately 40 minutes before cascading failures make the storage systems unrecoverable. Elena studied the readouts from the station, noting patterns in the energy releases that gave her an idea. Admiral, we might not need to prevent the collapse. We might be able to redirect it. Explain. The core species consciousness absorption technology works by creating quantum entanglement between individual minds and their collective processing systems. If we can reverse the entanglement process, we might be able to return the stolen consciousness to their original bodies, or at least to compatible biological matrices. Wong stared at her. You're talking about resurrection on a galactic scale. I'm talking about justice, Elena replied. But we'll need to capture the core species' primary processing facility intact. And we'll need volunteers from every species they've harvested to serve as templates for consciousness restoration. The battle around Nexus Station was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Human ships moved through space with an efficiency and coordination that spoke of generations of careful planning and preparation. Their weapons were precise, targeting specific systems rather than destroying everything in their path. This wasn't a war of conquest. It was a liberation operation, being conducted with surgical precision. Elena's communicator activated with an incoming transmission from the Nexari collective she'd encountered in the processing chamber. But now she could hear the individual voices that comprised its supposedly unified consciousness, and many of them were crying out for help. Please, came a voice that sounded distinctly human. I remember, my name was David Martinez. I was an engineer from the colony at Wolf 359. They took me 30 years ago. Please don't let them erase us completely. Elena's hands shook as she responded. David, this is Dr. Morowit, Elena Vasquez with the Terran Liberation Fleet. We're working on a way to free you and everyone else they've taken. Can you tell us about the processing facility's weaknesses? The quantum matrix is unstable when more than 12 consciousness streams are being processed simultaneously. If you can force them to exceed processing capacity, The entire system will, the transmission cut off as core species security systems detected the unauthorized communication. But Elena had heard enough. She turned to Admiral Wong with a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. "Admiral, I need to go back to the station." Wong's expression suggested she thought Elena had lost her mind. "Absolutely not. That station is about to become the center of the largest space battle in galactic history." "That's exactly why I need to be there," Elena insisted. "If we can overload their consciousness processing systems from the inside while maintaining quantum coherence from the outside, we can create a cascade failure that sends every stolen mind back to where it belongs. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have failed to prevent the largest mass murder in galactic history," Elena said bluntly. "But Admiral, if it does work, we'll have accomplished something unprecedented. We'll have undone 3 million years of atrocities." Admiral Wong studied the tactical displays, noting that core species reinforcements were arriving from throughout the galaxy. Whatever decision she made, it had to be made quickly. "Dr. Vasquez, this operation has an approximately 15% chance of success and an 85% chance of killing you in ways that would make the core species processing chambers look merciful. I understand the risks, Admiral." "No, you don't," Wong said. "But you're going anyway, because that's the kind of species humanity is. Chen, prepare a quantum insertion pod and get me every volunteer from every minor species we've rescued. Dr. Vasquez is going to need help from people who understand what the core species have done to their civilizations." Elena found herself surrounded by beings she'd only read about in diplomatic briefings. Krill from Epsilon Eridani, Dr. Meshka from the Vegan System, Commander Yates from Proxima Centauri, and dozens of others representing species that had been systematically suppressed by the core species for generations. "You're all insane for volunteering for this," Elena told them, as they prepared for insertion into Nexus Station's heavily defended processing center. Krill's translator made clicking sounds that Elena had learned to interpret as grim amusement. "Dr. Vasquez, my species has been trapped at pre-industrial technology levels for 800 years because the core species kept sabotaging our development. Insanity seems like a reasonable response." Dr. Meshka's scaled features showed an expression that might have been determination or fury. "They have 47 members of my species in those processing chambers. If there's any chance of getting them back, I'll take it." The quantum insertion was unlike anything Elena had experienced. One moment she was aboard the Curiosity, the next she was materializing in the same processing chamber where she'd first learned the truth about the core species. But now the chamber was in chaos, with energy discharges from failing containment systems creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't representing the potential death of millions of minds. The Nexari collective was there, but its unified appearance was breaking down as the individual consciousness that comprised it began to separate. Elena could see distinct beings within the collective form. Humans, Epsilon, Eridanians, vegans, and species she didn't recognize. "You came back," said the voice that had identified itself as David Martinez. "I didn't think anyone would risk it." "We're going to get you out of there," Elena promised, activating her quantum scanner and linking it to the processing chamber's control systems. "All of you. But I need you to help me understand how the consciousness integration process works." The data that flowed from the core species' own systems was horrifying in its scope and efficiency. They'd perfected the process of consciousness theft to an art form, developing techniques that could separate individual minds from their biological matrices and integrate them into collective processing networks that enhanced the core species' capabilities beyond anything a single species could achieve. But Elena was beginning to understand that the process had a fatal weakness. The quantum entanglement that allowed consciousness transfer worked both ways. If she could reverse the entanglement while maintaining quantum coherence, every stolen mind could theoretically be returned to its origin point. "Dr. Vasquez," came Krill's voice over the communication network. "We've reached the secondary processing centers. The readings we're getting... There are thousands of beings in each facility." Elena looked at her scanner readings, understanding that they had perhaps minutes before the cascading failures made any rescue attempt impossible. The scope of what they were attempting was staggering, essentially performing resurrection on a galactic scale while under fire from beings who had been galactic civilization's secret masters for longer than human civilization had existed. "All right," she said, activating systems throughout the processing facility. "Everyone remember, we're not just fighting for our own species here. We're fighting for every civilization the core species have ever touched. Don't let me down." As energy discharges filled the chamber and the battle raged throughout Nexus Station, Elena began the most complex technical procedure ever attempted by human science. She was going to steal back every mind the core species had taken, and she was going to do it using their own technology against them. The liberation of galactic civilization had truly begun. The quantum cascade that Elena initiated in the core species processing chambers created the largest consciousness transfer event in galactic history. As the energy wave spread from Nexus Station to processing facilities throughout known space, 3 million years of stolen minds began finding their way home. Elena watched from the command center of the newly rechristened Liberation Station as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Species that had been declared extinct centuries ago were suddenly communicating from distant worlds, where their consciousness had been stored and then restored to cloned biological matrices. Civilizations that had stagnated under core species manipulation were suddenly making technological leaps that would have taken them centuries under the old system. Dr. Vasquez, said the being who had once been part of the Nexari collective, but now stood before her as Dr. Sarah Kim, a human xenobiologist who had been absorbed 43 years earlier. I wanted to thank you personally. I remember everything, both my original life and the time I spent as part of their collective consciousness. What you did, it shouldn't have been possible. Elena smiled tiredly. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of technical challenges, diplomatic negotiations, and the overwhelming task of helping millions of restored beings readjust to individual existence. Dr. Kim, you were the one who gave me the key insight about the processing system vulnerabilities. Without the information from the absorbed consciousness, we never would have succeeded. The restoration process hadn't been perfect. Some minds had been too deeply integrated into the core species collectives to be safely separated. Others had been absorbed so long ago that their original biological patterns had been lost, but the overall success rate had exceeded 90%, representing the largest rescue operation in galactic history. Commander Chen approached with a datapad showing the latest reports from the galactic communication networks. Elena, you need to see this. We're receiving formal diplomatic requests from over 300 species that we didn't even know existed. The core species had been suppressing them for so long that the rest of the galaxy thought they were extinct. Elena reviewed the list, noting species from star systems that had been marked as uninhabited on all galactic charts. The scope of the core species' deception had been even greater than they'd initially realized. Entire regions of space had been declared off-limits, supposedly due to stellar phenomena or radiation hazards, but actually to hide thriving civilizations that were being systematically harvested. There's something else, Chen continued. Admiral Wong wants to see you in the Strategic Planning Center. We've got a situation developing that requires your expertise. Elena made her way through corridors that had been completely reconfigured since the liberation. Where once the station had been designed to process and contain consciousness, it now served as the coordination center for the largest rebuilding effort in galactic history. The walls were lined with quantum communication arrays that connected hundreds of star systems, allowing species to coordinate their reconstruction efforts and share technological insights that had been suppressed for millennia. The Strategic Planning Center was buzzing with activity as beings from dozens of species worked together to address the challenges of post-liberation galactic civilization. Admiral Wong stood at the center of a holographic display that showed the current political situation throughout known space. Dr. Vasquez, Wong said without looking away from the display, we've got a problem. The power vacuum left by the core species collapse is creating instabilities throughout the galaxy. Some of the restored civilizations are more advanced than others, and there's potential for conflicts as they all try to reclaim their territory simultaneously. Elena studied the display, noting areas where territorial disputes were already developing. What kind of conflicts are we talking about? The Altarian Republic is claiming sovereignty over 17 star systems that have been independent for the past 2,000 years, reported Dr. Mishka, who had become the liaison for reptilian species restoration efforts. The liberated Corvin Consciousness Collective is demanding the return of their original crystalline homeworld, which is currently occupied by a species that was relocated there by the core species 800 years ago. Elena sank into a chair, realizing that liberation from the core species was only the beginning of their challenges. We defeated galactic tyranny only to create the potential for galactic war. It gets worse, Wong said. 3 of the restored core species collectives have formally requested asylum. They're claiming that they were victims of their own system, forced to participate in consciousness harvesting against their original nature. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. Elena looked at the tactical displays showing the former core species, now separated into their component consciousness but still possessing technologies and knowledge that could be invaluable or extremely dangerous, depending on how they were used. Admiral, what's our official position on the asylum requests? That's what we need to decide, Wong replied. And the decision is ultimately yours, Dr. Vasquez. The Galactic Liberation Council has unanimously agreed that as the architect of the restoration process, you have the authority to determine the legal status of consciousness that were part of the core species collectives. Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The beings requesting asylum had participated in 3 million years of atrocities, but they'd done so as prisoners of a system that had literally stolen their individual identity. How do you assign responsibility to someone whose actions were controlled by a collective consciousness they were forced to be part of? There's something else you need to consider, said Ambassador Krill, who had been remarkably effective as a coordinator for insectoid species restoration. The former core species consciousness have knowledge about technologies and civilizations that predate their collective system. If we grant them asylum, they might be able to help us restore species that were completely absorbed before our historical records began. Elena activated a secure communication channel to the detention facility where the former core species were being held. The being who responded was one she recognized, the individual who had been part of the Nexari collective during her original infiltration. Dr. Vasquez, the being said. Its appearance was now clearly organic rather than the biomechanical construct she'd encountered before. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I know this situation is unprecedented.
It is, Elena agreed.
Help me understand something. During your time as part of the collective, how much individual agency did you retain? Almost none for the first several centuries, the being replied. The integration process was designed to suppress individual consciousness in favor of collective efficiency. But over time, some of us learned to maintain hidden areas of individual thought. We watched the atrocities being committed and were horrified, but we had no power to stop them. Elena studied the being's expression, noting details that her training in xenopsychology allowed her to interpret. You're telling me that you were aware but powerless? For approximately the last 50,000 years, yes. D. Vasquez, there are things about the galaxy's history that only we remember. Civilizations that existed before the core species system was established. Technologies that could help newly liberated species develop more safely. We want to make amends for what was done using our collective identity. The offer was tempting, but Elena was wary of accepting help from beings who had been part of the system that had oppressed the galaxy for so long. On the other hand, the knowledge they possessed could prevent conflicts and accelerate the recovery process for species that had been set back centuries by core species interference. What do you propose? Elena asked. Limited asylum in exchange for technical and historical assistance. We would remain under observation and supervision, but we would be allowed to contribute our knowledge to galactic reconstruction efforts. We understand that trust must be earned, and we're prepared to spend however long it takes to earn it. Elena looked around the strategic planning center at beings from dozens of species working together to rebuild galactic civilization. 6 months ago, most of them had been trapped at pre-industrial technology levels, or confined to primitive observer status. Now they were collaborating on projects that would have been impossible under the core species system. Admiral Wong, Elena said, making her decision. I am authorizing conditional asylum for former core species consciousness, subject to ongoing evaluation and immediate revocation if any evidence of deception or manipulation is detected. They'll work under direct supervision, and their access to sensitive information will be strictly controlled. Wong nodded. And if they prove trustworthy? Then maybe in a few decades they can start earning forgiveness for 3 million years of crimes against consciousness itself. Elena turned back to the holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization. Despite the challenges and potential conflicts, what she saw gave her hope. Species that had been enemies under the core species system were now sharing technology and resources. Civilizations that had been suppressed for millennia were making scientific breakthroughs that expanded the boundaries of known knowledge. Dr. Vasquez, came a voice from the communication array. This is Dr. Martinez from the Consciousness Restoration Project. We've got good news. The latest batch of deep archive restorations was successful. We've recovered another 1,200 individuals from storage matrices that were over 2 million years old. Elena smiled, understanding that each successful restoration represented not just an individual saved, but an entire civilization's worth of knowledge and culture that would otherwise have been lost forever. The liberation of the galaxy wasn't just about defeating tyranny, it was about giving back millions of years of stolen heritage to civilizations throughout known space. Commander Chen, Elena said, begin preparations for the next phase of restoration operations. And send a message to all member species of the Liberation Council. It's time to start planning for the future instead of just recovering from the past. As the day progressed and reports continued to arrive from throughout the galaxy, Elena found herself thinking about how different everything had become since her arrival at what was then called Nexus Station. Humanity had gone from being considered a minor species barely worth cataloging to being the architects of galactic liberation. But more importantly, the galaxy itself had transformed from a stagnant hierarchy controlled by parasitic collectives into a dynamic community of equals working together towards shared goals. The core species had been wrong about many things, but their greatest error had been underestimating the power of species working together freely rather than being controlled and manipulated. The new galactic civilization that was emerging from the ruins of their system was already showing signs of achieving more in months than the old system had accomplished in millennia. Alana looked out at the stars visible through the command center's viewports, knowing that each point of light now represented not a potential victim to be harvested, but a partner in building something unprecedented. A truly free galactic civilization, where every species could develop according to its own nature and contribute its unique perspectives to the community of sentient beings. Humanity's open hand had indeed revealed the core species' greatest secret, but in doing so, it had also revealed something far more important: the potential for what galactic civilization could become when it was built on cooperation rather than exploitation, freedom rather than control, and justice rather than the systematic theft of everything that made each species unique. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges but also infinite possibilities. And for the first time in 3 million years, every species in the galaxy would have the chance to face that future as themselves.